Chapter 6. The sun woke him, streaming in through the eastern windows. The forgotten cold plate had been waiting for him the night before, when he had finally climbed back up to his room, Tolly evidently being as good as his word. A couple of flies had settled on the food, but that was nothing to a seaman. Lawrence had waved them off and devoured it to the crumbs. He had meant only to rest a while before supper and a bath. Now he blinked stupidly up at the ceiling for the better part of a minute before getting his bearings. Then he remembered the training. He scrambled up at once. He had slept in his shirt and breeches, but fortunately he had a second of each, and his coat was reasonably fresh. He would have to remember to find a tailor locally where he could order another. It was a bit of a struggle to get it alone, but he managed and found himself in good order when at last he descended. The senior officer's table was nearly empty. Granby was not there, but Lawrence felt the effect of his presence in the sideways glances the two men sitting together at the lower end of the table gave him. Nearer the head of the room, a big, thick-set man with a florid face and no coat on was eating steadily through a heaped plate of eggs and black pudding and bacon. Lawrence looked around uncertainly for a sideboard. "Morning, Captain. Coffee or tea?" Tolly was at his elbow holding two pots. "Coffee, thank you," Lawrence said gratefully. He had the cup drained and held out for more before the man even turned away. "Do we serve ourselves?" he asked. "No, here comes Lacey with eggs and bacon for you. Just mention if you like something else," Tully said, already moving on. The maidservant was wearing coarse homespun, and she said good morning, cheerfully instead of staying silent, but it was so pleasant to see a friendly face that Lawrence found himself returning the greeting. The plate she was carrying was so hot it steamed, and he had not a fig to give for the propriety once he had tasted the splendid bacon, cured with some unfamiliar smoke and full of flavor, and the yolks of his eggs almost bright orange. He ate quickly with an eye on the square of a light traveling across the room where the sun struck through the high windows. "Don't choke," said the thick-set man, eyeing him. "Tolly, more tea," he bellowed. His voice was loud enough to carry through a storm. "You, Lawrence?" "You, Lawrence?" he demanded as his Lawrence finished swallowing and said, "Yes, sir, you have the advantage of me." "Berkeley," the man said, "look here, what sort of nonsense have you been filling your dragon's head with? My Maximus is muttering all morning about wanting a bath and his harness removed. Absurd stuff." "I do not find it so, sir, to be concerned with the comfort of my dragon," Lawrence said quietly, his hands tightening on the cutlery. Berkeley glared straight back at him. "Why, damn you, are you suggesting I neglect Maximus? No one has ever washed dragons. They don't mind a little dirt. They have hide." Lawrence reined in his temper and his voice. His appetite was gone. However, he set down knife and fork. "Evidently, your dragon disagrees. Do you suppose yourself a better judge than he of what gives him discomfort?" Berkeley scowled at him fiercely, then abruptly he snorted. "Well, you are a fire-breather. Make no mistake, and here I thought you Navy fellows were all so stiff and cautious-like." He drained his teacup and set it from the table. "I will be seeing you later. Saleritas wants to pace Maximus and Temeraire out together." He nodded, apparently in all friendliness, and left. Lawrence was a little dazed by this abrupt reversal. Then he realized he was near to being late, and he had no more time to think over the incident. Temeraire was waiting impatiently, and now Lawrence found himself paying for his virtue as the harness had to be put back on. Even with the help of 2 ground crewmen he called over, they barely reached the courtyard in time. Saleritas was not yet in the courtyard as they landed, but only a short while after their arrival. Lawrence saw the training master emerge from one of the openings carved into the cliff wall. Evidently these were private quarters, perhaps for older or more honored dragons. Saleritas shook off his wings and flew over to the courtyard, landing neatly on his rear legs, and he looked Temeraire over thoroughly. Yes, excellent depth of chest. Inhale, please. Yes, yes." He sat back down on all fours. "Now then, let us have a look at you. 2 full circuits of the valley. First circuit, horizontal turns, then back wing on the second. Go at an easy pace. I wish to assess your conformation, not your speed." He made a nudging gesture with his hand. Temeraire leapt back aloft at full speed. "Gently," Lawrence called, tugging at the reins to remind him, and Temeraire slowed reluctantly to a more moderate pace. He soared easily through the turns and then the loops. Cellaritas called out, "Now again at speed!" As they came back around, Lawrence bent low to Timurr's neck as the wings beat with great frantic thrusts about him, and the wind whistled at a high pitch past his ears. It was faster than it had ever gone before, and its accelerating he could not resist, and gave a small whoop for Timurr's ears only as they went racing into the turn. The second circuit completed, they winged back towards the courtyard again. Timurr was scarcely breathing fast, but before they crossed half the valley there came a sudden tremendous roaring from overhead, and a vast black shadow fell over them. Lawrence looked up in alarm to see Maximus barreling down towards their path, as though he meant to ram them. Timur jerked to an abrupt stop and hovered in place, and Maximus went flying past and swept back up just short of the ground. "What the devil do you mean by this, Berkeley?" Lawrence roared at the top of his lungs, standing in the harness. He was in a fury, his hands shaking but for his grip on the reins. "You will explain yourself, sir, this instant." "My God! How can he do that?" Berkeley said, shouting back at him, conversationally, as though they had not done anything out of the ordinary at all. Maximus was flying sedately back up towards the courtyard. "Cellaritas, do you see that?" "I do. Pray come in and land, Temeraire," Cellaritas said, calling out from the courtyard. "They were flying at you on orders, Captain. Do not be agitated," he said to Lawrence as Temeraire landed neatly on the edge. "It is of utmost importance to test the natural reaction of a dragon to being startled from above, where he cannot see. It is an instinct that often cannot be overcome by any training." Lawrence was still very ruffled, and Temeraire was as well. "That was very unpleasant," he said to Maximus reproachfully. "Yes, I know. It was done to me also when we started training," Maximus said cheerfully and unrepentant. "How do you just hang in the air like that?" "I never gave it much thought," Temeraire said, mollified a little. He craned his neck over to examine himself. "I suppose I just beat my wings the other way." Lawrence stroked Temeraire's neck comfortingly as Cellaritas peered closely at Temeraire's wing joints. "I had assumed it was a common ability, sir. Is it unusual, then?" Lawrence asked. "Only in the sense of it being entirely unique in my 200 years' experience," Cellaritas said dryly, sitting back. "Angel wings can maneuver in tight circles, but not hover in such a manner." He scratched his forehead. "We will have to give some thought to the applications of the ability. At least it will make you a very deadly bomber." Lawrence and Berkeley were still discussing it as they went in to dinner, as well as the approach to matching Temeraire and Maximus. Cellaritas had kept them working all the rest of the day, exploring Temeraire's maneuvering capabilities and pacing the two dragons against each other. Lawrence had already felt, of course, that Temeraire was extraordinarily fast and handy in the air, but there was a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction at hearing Cellaritas say so, and to have Temeraire easily outdistance the older and larger Maximus. Cellaritas had even suggested they might try and have Temeraire fly double pace. If he proved to retain his maneuverability even as he grew, then he might be able to fly a strapping run along the length of the entire formation and come back to his position in time to fly a second along with the rest of the dragons. Berkeley and Maximus had taken it in good part to have Temeraire fly rings around them. Of course, Regal Coopers were the first rates of the corps, and Temeraire would certainly never equal Maximus for sheer weight and power, so there was no real basis for jealousy. Still, after the tension for the first day, Lawrence was inclined to take an absence of hostility as a victory. Berkeley himself was an odd character, a little old to be a new captain and very queer in his manners, with a normal state of extremely stolidity broken by occasional explosions. But in a strange way he seemed a steady and dedicated officer, and friendly enough. He told Lawrence abruptly, as they sat at the empty table waiting for the other officers to join them, "You will have to face down a damned sight of jealousy, of course, for not having to wait for a prime and as much as anything. I was 6 years waiting for Maximus. It was well worth it, but I don't know that I would be able not to hate you if you were prancing about in front of me with an Imperial while he was still on the shelf." "Waiting," Lawrence said. "You were assigned him before he was even hatched?" "The moment the egg was cool enough to touch," Berkeley said, "we get 4 or 5 real hoopers in a generation. Aerial command, don't leave it a chance who mans 'em. I was grounded the moment I said yes, thank you, and here I sat staring at him in the shell and lecturing squeakers, hoping he wouldn't take too much bloody time about it, which by God he did. Berkeley snorted and drained his glass of wine. Lawrence had already formed a high opinion of Berkeley's skill in the air after his morning's work. He did indeed seem the sort of man who could be entrusted with a rare and valuable dragon. Certainly he was very fond of Maximus and showed it in a bluff way. As they had parted from Maximus and Temeraire in the courtyard, Lawrence had overheard him telling the big dragon, "I suppose I will get no peace until you have your harness taken off too, damn you," while ordering his ground crew to see to it, and Maximus nearly knocking him over with a caressing nudge. The other officers were beginning to file into the room. Most of them were much younger than himself or Berkeley, and the hall quickly grew noisy with their cheerful and often high-pitched voices. Lawrence was a little tense at first, but his fears did not materialize. A few more of the lieutenants did look at him dubiously, and Granby sat as far away as possible, but other than this no one seemed to pay much notice. A tall, blond man with a sharp nose said quietly, "I beg your pardon, sir," and slipped into the chair beside him. Though all the senior officers were in coats and neckcloths for dinner, the newcomer was noticeably different in having his neckcloth crisply folded and his coat pressed. "Captain Jeremy Rankin, at your service," he said courteously, offering hand. "I believe we have not met." "No, I am just arrived yesterday. Captain Will Lawrence at yours," Lawrence answered. Rankin had a firm grip and a pleasant and easy manner. Lawrence found him very easy to talk to, and learned without surprise that Rankin was the son of the Earl of Kensington. "My family have always sent third sons to the Corps, and in the old days before the Corps were formed and dragons reserved to the crown, my however many great-grandfather used to support a pair," Rankin said, "so I have no difficulties going home. We still maintain a small covert for flyovers, and I was often there even during my training. It is an advantage I wish more aviators could have," he added low, glancing around the table. Lawrence did not wish to say anything that might be construed as critical. It was all right for Rankin to hint at it, but being one of them. But from his own lips it could only be offensive. "It must be hard on the boys leaving home so early," he said with more tact. "In the Navy that is, the Navy does not take lads before they are 12, and even then they are set on shore between cruises and have time at home. Did you find it so, sir?" he added, turning to Berkeley. Berkeley said, swallowing. He looked a little hard at Rankin before answering Lawrence. "Can't say that I did. Squalled a little, I suppose, but one gets used to it, and we run the squeakers about to keep them from getting too homesick." He turned back to his food with no attempt to keep the conversation going, and Lawrence was left to turn back and continue his discussion with Rankin. "Am I late?" "Oh." It was a slim young boy, his voice not yet broken, but tall for his age, hurrying to the table with some disarray. His long red hair was half coming out of his plaited queue. He halted abruptly at the table's edge and slowly and reluctantly took the seat on Rankin's other side, which was the only one left vacant. Despite his youth he was a captain. The coat he wore had the double golden bars across the shoulders. "Why, Catherine, not at all. Allow me to pour you some wine," Rankin said. Lawrence, already looking in surprise at the boy, thought for a moment he had misheard, then saw he had not at all. The boy was indeed a young lady. Lawrence looked around the table blankly. No one else seemed to think anything of it, and it was clearly no secret. Rankin was addressing her in polite and formal tones, serving her from the platters. "Allow me to present you," Rankin added, turning. "Captain Lawrence of Temeraire, I forgot. That is, Captain Catherine Harcourt of Lily." "Hello," the girl muttered, not looking up. Lawrence felt his face going red. She was sitting there in breeches that showed every inch of her leg, with a shirt held closely only by a neckcloth. He shifted his gaze to the unalarming top of her head and managed to say, "Your servant, Miss Harcourt?" This at least caused her to raise her head. "No, it is Captain Harcourt," she said. Her face was pale, and her spray of freckles stood out prominently against it. But she was clearly determined to defend her rights. She gave Rankin a strangely defiant look as she spoke. Lawrence had used the address automatically. He had not meant to offend, but evidently he did. "I beg your pardon, Captain," he said at once, bowing his head in apology. It was indeed difficult to address her still. However, the title felt strange and awkward on his tongue. He was afraid he sounded unnaturally stiff. "I meant no disrespect." And now he recognized the dragon's name as well. It had struck him as unusual yesterday, but with so much else to consider, that one detail had slipped his mind. "I believe you have the long wing?" he said politely. "Yes, that is my Lily," she said, an involuntary warmth coming into her voice as she spoke her dragon's name. "Perhaps you were not aware, Captain Lawrence, that long wings will not take male handlers. It is some odd quirk of theirs, for which we must be grateful, else we would be deprived of such charming company," Rankin said, inclining his head to the girl. There was an ironic quality to his voice that made Lawrence frown. The girl was very obviously not at ease, and Rankin did not seem to be making her more so. She had dropped her head again and was staring at her plate with her lips pale and pressed together in an unhappy line. "It is very brave of you to undertake such a duty, Captain Harcourt. A glass, that is to say, to your health," Lawrence said, amending at the last moment and making the toast a sip. He did not think to appropriate a forced slip of a girl to drink an entire glass of wine. "It is no more than anyone else does," she said, muttering. Then belatedly she took her own glass and raised in return. "I mean, and to yours." Silently he repeated her title and name to himself. It would be very rude of him to make the mistake again, having been corrected once, but it was so strange he could not entirely trust himself yet. He took care to look at her face and not elsewhere. With her hair pulled back so tightly, she did look boyish, which was some help, along with the clothes that had allowed him to mistake her initially. He supposed that was why she went about in male dress, appalling and illegal though it was. He would have liked to talk to her, although it would have been difficult not to ask questions, but he could not be steadily talking over Rankin. He was left to wonder at it in the privacy of his own thoughts. Think that every Longwood service was captained by a woman who was shocking. Glancing at her slight frame, he wondered how she supported the work. He himself felt battered and tired after the day's flying, and though perhaps a proper harness would reduce the strain, he still found it hard to believe a woman could manage it day after day. It was cruel to ask it of her, but of course Longwoods could not be spared. They were perhaps the most deadly English dragons, to be compared only with regal Coopers, and without them the aerial defences of England would be hideously vulnerable. With this object of curiosity to occupy his thoughts, and Rankin's civil conversation as well, his first dinner passed more pleasantly than he had to some extent expected, and he rose from the table encouraged, even though Captain Harcourt and Berkeley had been silent and uncommunicative throughout. As they stood, Rankin turned to him and said, "If you are not otherwise engaged, may I invite you to join me in the officers' club for some chess? I rarely have the chance of a game, and I confess that since you mentioned that you play, I have been eager to seize upon the opportunity." "I thank you for the invitation. It would give me great pleasure as well," Lawrence said. "For the moment I must beg to be excused, however. I must see Temeraire, and then I have promised to read to him." "Read to him?" Rankin said, with an expression of amusement that did not hide his surprise at the idea. "Your dedication is admirable, and all that is natural in a new handler. However, allow me, if I may, to assure you that for the most part dragons are quite capable of managing on their own. I know several of our fellow captains are in the habit of spending all their free time with their beasts, and I would not wish you, based on their example, to think it necessary, or a duty to which you must sacrifice the pleasure of human company. I thank you kindly for your concern, but I assure you it is misplaced in my case," Lawrence said. "For my own part, I could desire no better society than Temeraire's, and it is as much for my own sake as for his that we are engaged. But I would be very happy to join you later this evening, unless you keep early hours." "I am happy to hear of it. I am very happy to hear it, on both counts," Rankin said. "As for my hours, not at all. I am not in training, of course, only here on courier duty, so I need not keep to a student's schedule. I am ashamed to admit that on most days I am not to be found downstairs until shortly before noon, but on the other hand that grants me the pleasure of expecting to see you this evening." With this they parted, and Lawrence set out to find Temeraire. He was amused to find 3 of the cadets lurking just outside the dining hall door. the sandy-haired boy and the two others, each clutching a fistful of clean white rags. "Oh, sir," the boy said, jumping up as he saw Lawrence coming out. "Would you need any more linens for Temeraire?" he asked eagerly. "We thought you might, so we brought some when we saw him eating." "Here now, Roland, what do you think you're about there?" Tolly, carrying a load of dishes from the dining hall, stopped on seeing the cadets accost Lawrence. "You know better'n to pester a captain." "I'm not, am I?" the boy said, looking hopefully at Lawrence. "I only thought perhaps we could help a little. He is very big after all. Morgan and Dyer and I have all our carbineers we can lock on without any trouble at all," he said earnestly, displaying an odd harness that Lawrence had not even noticed before. It was a thicker leather belt laced tightly around his waist, with an attached pair of straps ending in what looked at first glance like a large chain made of steel. On closer examination, Lawrence saw that this had a piece which could be folded in, and thus opened the link to be hooked onto something else. Straightening, Lawrence said, "As Temeraire does not yet have a proper harness, I do not think you can lock on to the straps with these. However," he added, hiding a smile at their downcast looks, "come along and we shall see what can be done." "Thank you, Tolly," he said, nodding to the servant. "I can manage them." Tolly was not bothering to hide his grin at this exchange. "Right you are," he said, carrying on with his duties. "Roland, is it?" Lawrence asked the boy as he walked onto the courtyard with 3 children trotting to keep up. "Yes, sir. Cadet Emily Roland at your service." Turning to her companions and thus remaining blithely unconscious of Lawrence's startled expression, she added, "And these are Andrew Morgan and Peter Dyer. We are all in our 3rd year here." "Yes, indeed. We would all like to help," Morgan said, and Dyer, smaller than the other 2, with round eyes, only nodded. "Very good," Lawrence managed, looking surreptitiously down at the girl. Her hair was cut bowl-fashion like the 2 boys, and she had a sturdy, stocky build. Her voice was scarcely pitched higher than theirs. His mistake had not been unnatural. Now that he gave a moment's thought to the matter, it made perfect sense. The Corps would naturally train up a few girls, in anticipation of needing them on Long Wing's hatch, and likely Captain Harcourt was herself the product of such training. But he could not help wondering what sort of parent would hand over a girl of tender years to the rigor of the service. They came out into the courtyard and were met by a sense of voracious activity. A great confusion of wings and dragon voices filling the air. Most, if not all, the dragons had just come from feeding and were now being attended by members of their crews, who were busy cleaning the harnesses. Despite Rankin's words, Lawrence scarcely saw a dragon whose captain was not standing by its head and petting or talking to it. This evidently was a common interlude during the day when dragons and their handlers were at liberty. He did not immediately see Temeraire. After searching the busy courtyard for a few moments, he realized that Temeraire had settled outside the exterior walls, luckily to avoid the bustle and noise. Before going out to him, Lawrence took the cadets over to Levitas. The little dragon was curled up alone just inside the courtyard walls, watching the other dragons with their officers. Levitas was alone, was still in his harness, but it looked much better than it had on the previous day. The leather looked as though it had been worked over and rubbed with oil to make it more supple, and the metal rings joining the straps were brightly polished. Lawrence now guessed that the rings were intended to provide a place for the carbineers to latch on. Though Levitas was small compared with Temeraire, he was still a large creature, and Lawrence thought he could easily sustain the weight of the 3 cadets for the short journey. The dragon was eager and happy for the attention, his eyes brightening as Lawrence made the suggestion. "Oh, yes, I can carry you all easily," he said, looking at the 3 cadets, who looked back at him with no less eagerness. They all scrambled up as nimbly as squirrels, and each of them locked on to 2 separate rings in an obviously well-practiced motion. Lawrence tugged on each strap. They seemed secure enough. "Very well, Levitas, take them down to the shore, and Temeraire and I will meet you there shortly," he said, patting the dragon's side. Having seen them off, Lawrence wove through the other dragons and made his way out the gate. He stopped short on his first clear look at Temeraire. The dragon looked strangely downcast, a marked difference from his happy attitude at the conclusion of the morning's work, and Lawrence hurried to his side. "Are you not feeling well?" Lawrence asked, inspecting his jaws. But Temeraire was blood-stained and messy from his meal and looked to have eaten well. "Something you ate disagree with you?" No, I am perfectly well, Timur said. It is only Lawrence. I am a proper dragon, am I not? Lawrence stared. The note of uncertainty in Timur's voice was wholly new. As proper a dragon as there is in the world. What on earth would make you ask such a question? Has anyone said anything unkind to you? A quick surge of temper was rising in him already at the mere possibility. The aviators might look at him askance and say what they liked, but he was not going to tolerate anyone making remarks to Timur. Oh no, Timur said, but in a way that made Lawrence doubt the words. No one was unkind, but they could not help noticing, while we were all feeding, that I do not look quite like the rest of them. They are all much more brightly colored than I am, and their wings do not have so many joins. Also, they have those ridges along their backs, and mine is plain, and I have more talons on my feet. He turned and inspected himself as he catalogued these differences. So they looked at me a little oddly, but no one was unkind. I suppose it is because I am a Chinese dragon. Yes, indeed, and you must recall that the Chinese are counted the most skilled breeders in the world, Lawrence said firmly. If anything, the others should look to you as their ideal, not the reverse, and I beg you will not for a moment doubt yourself. Only consider how well Celeritas spoke of your flying this morning. But I cannot breathe fire or spit acid, Timur said, settling back down, still with an air of dejection. And I am not as big as Maximus. He was quiet for a moment, then added, He and Lily ate first. The rest of us had to wait until they were done, and then we were allowed to hunt as a group. Lawrence frowned. It had not occurred to him that dragons would have a system of rank among themselves. My dear, there has never been a dragon of your breed in England, so your precedence has not yet been established, he said, trying to find an explanation which would console Temeraire. Also, perhaps it has something to do with the rank of their captains, for you must recall that I have less seniority than any other captain here. That would be very silly. You are older than most of them are, and have a great deal of experience, Temeraire said, losing some of his unhappiness in indignation over the idea of a slight to Lawrence. You have won battles, and most of them are only still in training. Yes, though at sea, and things are very different aloft, Lawrence said. But it is quite true that I am sure that when we have been in service a year or two, you will be acknowledged as you deserve. But for the moment, did you get enough to eat? We shall return to the feeding grounds at once if not. Oh no, there was no shortage, Timorous said. I was able to catch whatever I wanted, and the others did not get in my way very much at all. He fell silent and was clearly inclined to be dismal. Lawrence said, Come, we must see about getting you bathed. Temeraire brightened at the prospect, and after the better part of an hour spent playing with Lepidus in the lake, and then being scrubbed by the cadets, his spirits were greatly restored. Afterwards he curled happily around Lawrence in the warm courtyard when he settled down together to read, apparently much happier. But Lawrence still saw Temeraire looking at his gold and pearl chain more often, and touching it with the tip of his tongue. He was beginning to recognize the gesture as a desire for reassurance. He tried to put affection in his voice as he read, and stroked the foreleg on which he was comfortably seated. He was still frowning with concern later that evening as he came into the officers' club. A left-handed blessing for the momentary hush that fell when he came into the room bothered him far less than it might otherwise have done. Granby was standing at the pianoforte near the door, and he pointedly touched his forehead in salute and said, Sir, as Lawrence came in. It was an odd sort of insolence that could hardly be reprimanded. Lawrence chose to answer as if it had been his sincere, and said politely, Mr. Granby, with a nod that he made a general gesture to the room, and walked on with what haste was reasonable. Rankin was sitting far back in a corner of the room by a small table, reading a newspaper. Lawrence joined him, and in a few moments the two of them had set up the chessboard which Rankin had taken down from a shelf. The buzz of conversation had already resumed. Between moves, Lawrence observed the room as well as he could without making himself obvious. Now that his eyes were open, he could see a few female officers scattered in the crowd here, also. Their presence seemed to place no restraint on the general company. The conversation, though good-natured, was not wholly refined, and it was made noisy and confused by interruptions. Nevertheless, there was a clear sense of good fellowship throughout the room, and he could not help feeling a little wistful at his natural exclusion from it. Both by their preference and his own, he did not feel that he was fitted for participation, and it could not but give him a pang of loneliness. But he dismissed it almost at once. A Navy captain had to be used to a solitary existence, and often without such companionship as he had in Temeraire. And also he might now look forward to Rankin's company as well. He returned his attention to the chessboard and looked no more at the others. Rankin was perhaps out of practice a little, but not unskilled, and as the game was not one of Lawrence's favorite pastimes, they were reasonably well matched. While they played, Lawrence mentioned his concern for Timorous to Rankin, who listened with sympathy. It is indeed shameful that they should have not given him precedence, but I must counsel you to leave the remedy to him, Rankin said. They behave that way in the wild. The deadlier breeds demand first fruits of the hunt, and the weaker give way. He must likely assert himself among the other beasts to be given more respect. Do you mean by offering some sort of challenge? But surely that cannot be a wise policy, Lawrence said, alarmed at the very idea. He had heard the old fantastic story of wild dragons fighting among themselves and killing one another in such dueling. To allow battle among such desperately valuable creatures for so little purpose? It rarely comes to an actual battle. They know each other's capabilities, and I promise you, once he feels certain of his strength, he will not tolerate it, nor will he meet with any great resistance, Rankin said. Lawrence could not have great confidence in this. He was certain it was no lack of courage that prevented Temeraire from taking precedence, but a more delicate sensibility, which had unhappily enabled him to sense the lack of approbation of the other dragons. I would still like to find some means of reassuring him, Lawrence said sadly. He could see that henceforth all the feedings would be a source of fresh and happiness to Temeraire, and yet they could not be avoided, save by feeding him at different times, which would only make him feel still more isolated from the others. "Oh, give him a drinket, and he will settle down," Rankin said. "It is amazing how it restores their spirits. Whenever my beast becomes sulky, I bring him a bauble, and he is at once all happiness again, just like a temperamental mistress." Lawrence could not help smiling at the absurdity of this joking comparison. "I have been meaning to get him a collar, as it happens," he said, more seriously, "such as the one Salaritas wears, and I do believe it would make him very happy, but I do not suppose there is anywhere here where such an item may be commissioned. I can offer you a remedy for that, at any rate. I go to Edinburgh regularly on my courier duties, and there are several excellent jewelers there. Some of them even carry ready-made items for dragons, as there are many coverts here in the north within flying distance. If you care to accompany me, I would be happy to bear you there," Rankin said. "My next flight will be this Saturday, and I can easily have you back for supper time if we leave in the morning." "Thank you. I am very much obliged to you," Lawrence said, surprised and pleased. "I will apply to Salaritas for permission to go." So Salaritas frowned at the request made the next morning, and looked at Lawrence narrowly. "You wish to go with Captain Rankin? Well, it'll be the last day of liberty you have for a long time, for you must and will be here for every moment of Temeraire's flight training." He was almost fierce about it, and Lawrence was surprised by his vehemence. "I assure you I have no objection," he said, wondering in astonishment if the training master thought he meant to shirk his duties. "Indeed, I have not imagined otherwise, and I am well aware of the need for urgency in this training. If my absence would cause any difficulty, I beg you to have no hesitation in refusing the request." Whatever the source of his initial disapproval, Salaritas was mollified by this statement. "As it happens, the ground crewman will need a day to fit Temeraire out with his new gear, and it will be ready by then," he said in less stern tones. "I suppose we can spare you, as long as Temeraire is not finicky about being harnessed without you there, and you may as well have a final excursion." Temeraire assured Lawrence he did not mind, so the plan was settled, and Lawrence spent part of the next few evenings making measurements of his neck and of Maximus's, thinking the regal Cooper's current size might be a good approximation for what Temeraire could reach in future. He pretended to Temeraire that these were for the harness. He looked forward to giving the present as a surprise, and seeing it taken take away some of the quiet distress that lingered, casting a pall over the dragon's usually high spirits. Rankin looked with amusement at his sketches of possible designs. The two of them had already formed the settled habit of playing chess together in evenings and sitting together at dinner. Lawrence so far had little conversation with the other aviators. He regretted it, but could see little point in trying to push himself forward when he was comfortable enough as he was, and in the absence of any sort of invitation. It seemed clear to him that Rankin was as outside the common life of the aviators as he was, perhaps set aside the elegance of his manners, and if they were both outcasts for the same reason, they might at least have the pleasure of each other's society for compensation. He and Berkeley met at breakfast and training every day, and he continued to find the other captain an astute airman and aerial tactician, but at dinner or in company Berkeley was silent. Lawrence was not sure either that he wished to draw the man into intimacy or that a gesture in that direction would be welcome. So he contented himself with being civil and discussing technical matters. So far they had known each other only a few days, and there would be time enough to take a better measure of the man's real character. He had steeled himself to react properly on meeting Captain Harcourt again, but she seemed shy of his company. He saw her almost at any distance, though. Temeraire was soon to be flying in his company with her dragon, Lily. One morning, however, she was at table when he arrived at breakfast. In an attempt to make natural conversation, he asked her how her dragon came to be called Lily, thinking it might be a nickname like Bolly's. She flushed to her roots again and said very stiffly, "I like the name. Pray, how did you come to name Temeraire?" To be perfectly honest, I did not have any idea of the proper way of naming a dragon, nor any way of finding it out at the time, Lawrence said, feeling he had made a misstep. No one had remarked on Temeraire's unusual name before, and only now that she had brought it to task for it did he guess that perhaps he had raised a sore point with her. I called him after a ship. The first Temeraire was captured from the French, and the one presently in service in a 98-gun three-decker, one of our finest line of battleships. When he had made this confession, she seemed to grow more easy, and said with more candor, "Oh, as you have said as much, I do not mind admitting that it was nearly the same with me. Lily was not probably expected to hatch for another 5 years at the earliest, and I had no notion of a name. When her egg hardened, they woke me in the middle of the night at Edinburgh covert and flung me on a Winchester, and I barely managed to read the bath before she broke the shell. I simply gaped when she invited me to give her a name, and I could not think of anything else." "It is a charming name, and perfectly suits her, Catherine," Rankin said, joining them at the table. "Good morning, Lawrence. Have you seen the paper? Lord Pug has finally managed to marry off his daughter. Harold must be desperately hard up." This piece of gossip, concerning as it did people whom Harcourt did not know at all, left her outside the conversation. Before Lawrence could change the subject, however, she excused herself and slipped away from the table, and he lost the opportunity to further the acquaintance. The few days remaining in the weeks before the excursion passed swiftly. The training as yet was still more a matter of testing Temeraire's flying abilities and seeing how best he and Maximus could be worked into the formation centered on Lily. Celeritas had them fly endless circuits around the training valley, sometimes trying to minimize the number of wing beats, sometimes trying to maximize their speed, and always trying to keep them in line with one another. One memorable morning was spent almost entirely upside down, and Lawrence found himself dizzy and red-faced at the end of it. The stouter Berkeley was huffing as he staggered off Maximus's back after the final pass, and Lawrence leapt forward to ease him down to the ground as his legs gave out from under him. Maximus hovered anxiously over Berkeley and rummed in distress. "Stop that moaning, Maximus. Nothing more ridiculous than a creature of your size behaving like a mother hen," Berkeley said as he fell into the chair and the servants had hurriedly brought. "Ah, thank you," he said, taking the glass of brandy Lawrence offered him, and sipped at it while Lawrence loosened his neckcloth. "I am sorry to have put you under such a strain," Celeritas said, when Berkeley was no longer gasping and scarlet. "Ordinarily these trials would be spread over half a month's time. Perhaps I am pressing on too quickly." "Nonsense! I will be well in a trice," Berkeley said at once. "I know damned well we cannot spare a moment. Celeritas, do not be holding us back on my account. Lawrence, why are matters so urgent? Temeraire asked that evening after dinner, as they once again settled down together outside the courtyard walls to read. Is there to be a great battle soon, and are we needed for it? Lawrence folded the book close, keeping his place with a finger. No, I am sorry to disappoint you, but we are too raw to be sent by choice directly into a major action. Still, it is very likely that Lord Nelson will not be able to destroy the French fleet without the help of one of the long-wing formations presently stationed in England. Our duty will be to take their place, so they may go. That will indeed be a great battle, and though we will not participate in it directly, I assure you our part is by no means unimportant. No, though it does not sound very exciting, Temeraire said, but perhaps France will invade us, and then we will have to fight. He's rather more hopeful than anything else. We must hope not, Lawrence said. If Nelson destroys their fleet, it will pretty well put paid to any chance on Bonaparte's bringing his army across. Though I have heard he has something like 1,000 boats to carry his men, they are only transports, and the navy would sink them by the dozens if they tried to come across without the protection of the fleet. Temeraire sighed and put his head down over his forelegs. Oh, he said. Lawrence laughed and stroked his nose. How bloodthirsty you are, he said with amusement. Do not fear. I promise you will see enough action when your training is done. There is a great deal of skirmishing over the Channel, for one thing, and then we may be sent in support of a naval operation, or perhaps sent to harass the French shipping independently. This heartened Temeraire greatly, and he turned his attention to the book with restored good humor. Friday they spent in an endurance trial, trying to see how long both dragons could stay aloft. The formation's slowest members would be the 2 Yellow Reapers, so both Temeraire and Maximus had to be kept to that slower pace for the test, and they went around and around the training valley in an endless circle, while above them the rest of the formation performed a drill under Celerita's supervision. A steady rain blurred all the landscape below into a gray monotony and made the task still more boring. Temeraire often turned his head to inquire, a little plaintively, how long he had been flying, and Lawrence was generally obliged to inform him that scarcely a quarter of an hour had passed since the last query. Lawrence at least could watch the formation wheeling and driving, their bright color marked against the pale gray sky. Poor Temeraire had to keep his head straight and level to maintain the best flying posture. After perhaps 3 hours, Maximus began to fall off the pace, his great wings beating more slowly and his head drooping. Berkeley took him back in, and Temeraire was left all alone, still going around. The rest of the formation came spiraling down to the land in the courtyard, and Lawrence saw the dragons nodding to Maximus, inclining their heads respectively. At this distance he could not make out any words, but it was clear that they were all conversing easily among themselves while their captains milled about and Celeritas gathered them together to review their performance. Temeraire saw them as well and sighed a little, though he said nothing. Lawrence leaned forward and stroked his neck, and silently vowed to bring him back the most elegant jewels he could find in the whole of Edinburgh, if he had to draw out half his capital to do so. Lawrence came out into the courtyard early that next morning to say farewell to Temeraire before his trip with Rankin. He stopped short as he emerged from the hall. Levatus was being put under gear by a small ground crew, with Rankin at his head, reading a newspaper and paying little attention to the proceedings. "Hello, Lawrence," the little dragon said to him happily. "Look, this is my captain. He has come, and we are flying to Edinburgh today." "Have you been talking with him?" Rankin said to Lawrence, glancing up. "I see you are not exaggerating, and that you do indeed enjoy dragon society. I hope you will not find yourself tiring of it. You will be taking Lawrence along with myself today. You must make an effort to show him a good pace," he told Levatus. "Oh, I will, I promise," Levatus said at once, bobbing his head anxiously. Lawrence made some civil answer and walked quickly to Temeraire's side to cover his confusion. He did not know what to do. There was no possible way to avoid the journey now without being truly insulting, but he felt almost ill. Over the last few days he had seen more evidence that he liked of Levatus' unhappiness and neglect. The little dragon watched anxiously for a handler who did not come, and if he or his harness had been given more than a cursory wipe, it was because Lawrence had encouraged the cadets to see to him and asked Holland to continue attending to his harness. To find Rankin the one responsible for such neglect was bitterly disappointing. To see Levitus behaving with such servility, servility and gratitude for the least cold attention was painful. Perceived through the lens of his neglect of his dragon, Rankin's remarks on dragons took on a character of disdain that could only be strange and unpleasant in an aviator, and his isolation from his fellow officers also, rather than an indication of nice taste. Every other aviator had introduced himself with his dragon's name ready to his lips. Rankin alone had considered his family name of more importance, and left Lawrence to find out only by accident that Levitus was assigned to him. But Lawrence had not seen through any of this, and now he found he had, in the most unguarded sort of way, encouraged the acquaintance of a man he could never respect. He petted Temeraire and made him some reassurances meant mostly for his own comfort. "Is anything wrong, Lawrence?" Temeraire said, nosing at him gently with concern. "You do not seem well." "No, I am perfectly well, I assure you," he said, making an effort to sound normal. "You are quite certain you do not mind my going?" he asked, with a faint hope. "Not at all." "And you will be back by evening, will you not?" Temeraire asked. "Now that we have finished Duncan, I was hoping perhaps you could read me something more about mathematics. I thought it was very interesting how you explained that you could tell where you are when you have been sailing for a long time, only through knowing the time and some equations." Lawrence had been very glad to leave behind mathematics after having forced the basics of trigonometry into his head. "Certainly, if you like," he said, trying to keep dismay out of his voice. "But I thought perhaps you would enjoy something about Chinese dragons." "Oh yes, that would be splendid too. We could read that next," Timur said. "It is very nice how many books there are indeed, and on so many subjects." If it would give Timur something to think about and keep him from being distressed, Lawrence was prepared to go as far as to bring his Latin up to snuff and read him Principia Mathematica in the original, so he only sighed privately. "Very well, then I will leave you in the hands of the ground crew. I see them coming now." Holland was leading the party. The young crewman had attended so well to Timur's harness, and seen to Levitus with such good will, that Lawrence had spoken of him to Stellaritus, and asked to have him assigned to lead Timur's ground crew. Lawrence was pleased to see the request had been granted, because this step was evidently a promotion of some significance. There had been some uncertainty about the matter. He nodded to the young man. "Mr. Holland, will you be so good as to present me to these other men?" he asked. When he had been given all their names and repeated them silently over to fix them in his memory, he deliberately met their eyes in turn and said firmly, "I am sure Temeraire will give you no difficulty, but I trust you will make a point of consulting his comfort as you make the adjustments. Temeraire, please have no hesitation about informing these men if you notice the least discomfort or restriction upon your movement." Levitas' case had provided him with evidence that some crewmen might neglect their assigned dragon's gear if a captain was not watchful, and indeed anything else was hardly to be expected. Though he had no fear of Holland's neglecting his work, Lawrence meant to put the other men on notice that he would not tolerate any such neglect where Temeraire was concerned. If such severity fixed his reputation as a hard captain, so be it. Perhaps in comparison with other aviators he was. He would not neglect what he considered his duty for the sake of being liked. A murmur of "Very good," and "Right you are," came in response. He was able to ignore the raised eyebrows and exchange glances. "Carry on," he said, with a final nod, and turned away with no small reluctance to join Rankin. All his pleasure in the expedition was gone. It was distasteful in the extreme to stand by while Rankin snapped at Levitas and ordered him to hunch down uncomfortably for them to board. Lawrence climbed up as quickly as he could and did his best to sit where his weight would give Levitas the least difficulty. The flight was brief, at least. Levitas was very swift, and the ground rolled away at a tremendous pace. He was glad to find the speed of their passage made conversation nearly impossible, and he was able to give brief answers to the few remarks Rankin ventured to shout. They landed less than 2 hours after they had left. at the great walled covert which spread out beneath the watchful looming eye of Edinburgh Castle. "Stay here quietly. I do not want to hear that you have been pestering the crew when I return," Rankin said sharply to Levitas. After dismounting, he threw the reins of his harness around a post, as if Levitas were a horse to be tethered. "You can eat when we return to Lochlogan." "I do not want to bother them, and I cannot wait to eat, but I am a little thirsty," Levitas said in a small voice. "I tried to fly as fast as I could," he added. "It is very fast indeed, Levitas, and I am grateful to you. Of course you must have something to drink," Lawrence said. This was as much as he could bear. "You there," he called to the ground crew lounging round the edges of the clearing. None of them had stirred when Levitas had landed. "Bring a trough of clean water at once, and see to his harness while you are about it." The men looked a little surprised, but they set to work under Lawrence's ard eye. Rankin did not make any objection, although as they climbed up the stairs away from the covert and onto the streets of the city, he said, "I see you are a little tender-hearted towards them. I am hardly surprised, as that is the common mode among aviators. But I must tell you that I find discipline answers far better than any sort of coddling more often seen. Levitas, for instance, must always be ready for a long and dangerous flight. It is good for him to be used to going without." Lawrence felt at the awkwardness of his situation, as he was here as Rankin's guest, and he would have to fly back with the man in the evening. Nevertheless, he could not restrain himself from saying, "I will not deny having the warmest sentiments towards dragons as a whole. In my experience thus far, I have found them uniformly appealing and worthy of nothing but respect. However, I must disagree with you very strongly that providing ordinary and reasonable care in any way constitutes coddling, and I have always found that deprivation and hardship, when necessary, can be better endured by men who have not been subjected to them previously for no cause." "Oh, dragons are not men, you know, but I will not argue with you," Rankin said easily. Perversely, it made Lawrence even angrier. If Rankin had been willing to defend his philosophy, it could have been sincere if wrong-headed position. But clearly it was not. Rankin was only consulting his own ease, and those remarks were merely excuses for the neglect he performed. Fortunately, they were at the crossroads where their paths were to diverge. Lawrence did not have to endure Rankin's company any longer, as the men had to go on rounds to the military offices in the city. They had agreed to meet back at the covert before their departure, and he escaped gladly. He wandered around the city for the next hour without direction or purpose, solely to clear his mind and temper. There was no obvious way to ameliorate Levitas's situation, and Rankin was clearly injured to disapproval. Lawrence now recalled Berkeley's silence, Harcourt's evident discomfort, the avoidance of the other aviators in general, and Salarita's disapproval. It was unpleasant to think that by showing such an evident partiality for Rankin's company, he had given himself the character of approving the man's behavior. Here was something for which he had readily earned the cold looks of the other officers. It was of no use to say he had not known. He ought to have known. Instead of putting himself to the trouble of learning the ways of his new comrades' norms, he had been happy enough to throw himself into the company of one they avoided and looked at askance. He could hardly excuse himself by saying he had not consulted or trusted their general judgment. He calmed himself only with difficulty. He could not easily undo the damage he had done in a few unthinking days, but he could and would alter his behavior henceforth. By putting forth the dedication and effort that only temeraries do in any case, he could prove that he neither approved nor intended to practice any sort of neglect. By courtesy and attention to those aviators with whom he would be training, like Berkeley and the other captains of the formation, he could show that he did not hold himself above his company. These small measures would take a great deal of time to repair his reputation, but they were all he could do. The best he could do was resolve upon them at once and prepare to endure however long it would take. Having finally drawn himself from his self-recrimination, he now took his bearings and hurried on to the offices of the Royal Bank. His usual bankers were Drummond's in London, but on learning that he was to be stationed at Lochlogan, he had written to his prize agent to direct the funds from the capture of the Amity here. As soon as he had given his name, he at once saw that the instructions had been received and obeyed. for he was instantly conducted to a private office and greeted with particular warmth. The banker, a Mr. Donaldson, was happy to inform him, on his inquiry, that the prize money for the Amity had included a bounty for Temeraire equal to the value that would have been placed on an unhatched egg of the same breed. Not that a number could easily be settled upon, as I understand it, for we have no notion of what the French paid for it, but at length it was held equal to a regal Cooper egg in value, and I am happy to say that your 2/8 share of the entire prize comes to nearly £14,000, he finished, and struck Lawrence dumb. Having recovered over a glass of excellent brandy, Lawrence soon perceived the self-serving efforts of Admiral Croft behind his extraordinary assessment. But he hardly objected. After a brief discussion which ended in his authorizing the bank to invest perhaps half the money into the funds for him, he shook Mr. Donaldson's hand with enthusiasm and took away a handful of banknotes and gold, along with a generously offered letter which he might show to merchants to establish his credit. The news restored his spirits to some extent, and he soothed them further by purchasing a great many books and examining several different pieces of valuable jewelry, and imagining Temeraire's happiness at receiving them both. He settled finally upon a broad pendant of platinum, almost like a breastplate, set with sapphires around a single enormous pearl. The piece was designed to fasten around the dragon's neck with a chain that could be extended as Temeraire grew. The price was enough to make him swallow, but he recklessly signed the check regardless, and then waited while a boy ran to certify the amount with the bank so he could immediately bear away the well-wrapped piece, with some difficulty due to its weight. From there he went straight back to the covert, even though there was another hour to the appointed meeting time. Levitas was lying unattended in the same dusty landing ground, his tail curled around himself. He looked tired and lonely. There was a small herd of sheep kept penned in the covert. Lawrence ordered one killed and brought for him, and then sat with the dragon and talked to him quietly while Rankin returned. The flight back was a little slower than the one out, and Rankin spoke coldly to Levitas when they landed. Past the point of caring if it seemed rude, Lawrence interrupted with praise and patted Levitas. It was little enough, and he felt miserable to see the little dragon huddled silently in a corner of the courtyard after Rankin had gone inside. But aerial command had given Levitas to Rankin. Lawrence had no authority to correct the man who was senior to him. Temeraire's new harness was neatly assembled upon a couple of benches by the side of the courtyard, the broad neck brace marked with his name in silver rivets. Temeraire himself was sitting outside again, looking over the quiet lake valley that was gradually fading into shadow as the late afternoon sun sank in the west, his eyes thoughtful and a little sad. Lawrence went to his side at once, carrying the heavy packages. Temeraire's joy in the pendant was so great as to rescue Lawrence's mood as well as his own. The silver metal looked dazzling against his black hide, and once it was on he tilted the piece up with a forehead to look at the great pearl in enormous satisfaction, his pupils widening tremendously so he could better examine it. "And I do so like pearls, Lawrence," he said, nuzzling at him gratefully. It is very beautiful, but was it not dreadfully expensive?" "It was worth every penny to see you looking so handsome," Lawrence said, meaning that it was worth every penny to see him so happy. "The prize money for the Amity has come in, so I am well in pocket, my dear. Indeed, it is quite your due, you know, for the better part of it comes from the bounty for our having taken your egg from the French." "Well, that was none of my doing, although I am very glad it happened," Temeraire said. "I am sure I could not have liked any French captain half as much as you. Oh, Lawrence, I am so very happy, and none of the others have anything nearly so nice." He cuddled himself around Lawrence with a deep sigh of satisfaction. Lawrence climbed into the crook of one foreleg and sat there petting him and enjoying his continued quiet gloating over the pendant. Of course, if the French ship had not been so delayed and then captured, some French aviator would have had Temeraire by now. Lawrence had previously given little thought to what might have happened. Likely the man was somewhat cursing his luck. The French certainly would have learned that the egg had been captured by now, even if they did not know that it had hatched an imperial or that Temeraire had been successfully harnessed. He looked up at the preening dragon and felt the rest of his sorrow and anxiety leave him. Whatever else happened, he could hardly complain of the turn fate had served him in comparison with that poor fellow. "I have brought you some books as well," he said. "Shall I begin on Newton for you? I have found a translation of his book on the principles of mathematics, although I will warn you at once that I am wholly unlikely to be able to make sense of what I read for you. I am no great hand at mathematics beyond what my tutors got into my head for sailing." "Please do," Tamara said, looking away from his new treasure for a moment. "I am sure we will be able to puzzle it out together, whatever it is."